I think we'll first start with a brief introduction to this place, where we are, what we're going to look at, and then I'm going to point out the specific features here. Now this is, in my opinion, this is one of the best areas in the city of Delhi. There's no place like Tughlakabad, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy it very, very much. It's a great place, and there are many, many details, big and small, which you don't see or find anywhere else in the city. So it's quite unique as a monument complex. And most of what you are going to see here is also unique for the fact that it hasn't changed very much. And the thing with monuments is, or with urban landscapes is, places where we live, because people are constantly living at a place, they constantly change it. So even if I'm living at a historical site, I might alter it to suit my own needs and conveniences. Something like that hasn't happened to Tughlakabad very much. So many people have called it ruins frozen in time. So the Tughlaks built it, they abandoned it soon after, and not much has changed. Of course, the forces of nature have taken over, time has taken its toll on the buildings, and that is why you see that most of it is ruins. There are not many complete structures, palaces, which you're gonna see. What you mostly see is these huge walls, fortification walls. And that is why throughout most of the walk, I'll be basically pointing to a pile of stones and trying to convince you that this was a palace or this was a stable, things like that. Yeah? So we'll have to use a lot of imagination, and I'll try and make it more vivid in terms of stories or in terms of what the sultans, people who inhabited this place, were doing here. As a brief background, most of you would have heard of Tughlaks in some way or the other. Of course, we all were forced to study about them, whether we wanted or not. But also, Tughlaks have been part of our psyche in terms of folklore, in terms of, muhavras, sayings. We hear of what is called the Tughlaki Farman, which means an arbitrary order. It's a saying, it's a phrase in Hindi. So things like that. So they are very much part of our psyche. They're still used. So who on earth were they? Tughlaks were one of the rulers who ruled from northern India, and they were around in the 14th century, which means that they were part of what is called the medieval period in Indian history. And there are three Tughlaks whom we are concerned with. In the entire dynasty, there were three people who were the main movers and shakers. The first guy was Ghiyasuddin Tughlak. He's the founder of the dynasty, as well as the founder of this complex. So he built it all. The second is his son and successor Muhammad Tughlak, the most famous or the most notorious actually. Yeah. And the third is Firoz Shah Tughlak, the successor of Muhammad. So you don't really have to remember all these names, you can just refer to them as Tughlak 1, 2 and 3. That'll be simple. But these people have actually done a lot in terms of, they're very active people. So it's not just that they were sitting on the throne and basically enjoying themselves, they were also making a lot of hell for everybody around them, which is why they're constantly mentioned in contemporary records and people who are writing much after them also. And we are still talking about them because they left a lot of ruins to look at, and also a lot of things they did which are still, you could say, influencing us or influencing our history. So as we go along the walk, I'm going to be trying to discuss all of this with you. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have anything to share, you're most welcome to do so. Okay? And this is a large complex. There's plenty of space to walk around. But just be careful. There's some loose stones everywhere. So as you walk, make sure you're treading on firm ground. Yeah? It's a little difficult terrain to negotiate. Okay? Come. Entire fort complex. We have entered through a gate and then turned left. So the area we are covering now is what is called the palace area. you'll get a better idea of the layout once we are at an elevated bit, and then you'll be able to point out the relative positions of different parts of the fort. But this bit is the palace area, and we're now walking along what is the fortification wall. So we're going to be walking inside the walls and then try and see what was the kind of fortification which the Tughlaqs built for their forts, and which was actually typical of many other areas built by them as well. Now this bit, we are walking along a street which goes east-west. This is the western side, yeah. So the area we've just walked through is part of the original layout of the fort itself. So it's not a new conservation work innovation. This is part of the fort itself, the street, and we're going to be walking towards this area, which was part of the fortification. So it's not that this was open to the sky. This would have been a vaulted area. So you have to imagine soldiers trying to negotiate their way around this passage. Several levels to it. So the first one is the one which you see right behind me. This is the first tier, and after which they have built a ledge where we are all standing. It is about a few feet, and then another wall, and then behind it was the archway where we all walk. So the first level was this. These walls are much reduced now. So you have to imagine these walls not only with the slits you see on them, but also battlement pillars. Yeah? These are battlements are patterns which are made on walls which have slits so that you can fire ammunition through it. And also for ventilation for people who are behind the walls. So these walls are actually quite incomplete. There would have been much more of it. So you provide a ledge after that, you build another level, and then there's a whole gallery to go around. So it's at least 3 tiers. And this is also, this is not the highest point in terms of fortification. Once we go into the citadel area, it's even higher. And what you notice is that all of these walls have what is called a batter, which means an inclination to the ground level. So they are not perpendicular to the ground, they are all at an angle to the ground. And this is called batter. It's not as the same as the batter for the cakes. It's a technical architectural term, which means that the walls are at an angle to the ground, they are not perpendicular. And this is a characteristic feature of the Tughlaq architecture. Anywhere you go, and whatever the Tughlaqs built, whether it was forts, whether it was their tombs, any other public building they might have built, all their walls are slanting. You see the masonry like this? This was the basic core of the wall, and then above it there would have been a facing for the wall made up of nicely polished, dressed stones, yeah? Even in size, with a smooth surface. And all of these would have formed a covering to these walls. So when you see stones jutting out unevenly, these are remains of that dressing. You will see more examples of these, but these are what remain in this bit. The rest of all is all gone. Why is it gone? Firstly, because of time, these stones just fell away. Tughlaq, which means Tughlaq I, is the founder of the city. He didn't rule for a very long time, and this guy is actually a very, very able warrior and administrator. How did the city come into being first? He was Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Tughlaq I was an employee of the last Khalji Sultan. And the story goes that they were just walking through, or maybe riding their horses through this area, and Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq comments or tells his Sultan that, look, this is a nice area to build a fort. The Sultan thinks, what is the slave trying to tell me and giving me random suggestions? So he responded sharply and saying that when you go ahead, when you become the Sultan, you go ahead and build your own fort there. And apparently that's what happened. Later this Khalji Sultan was killed off, not by Tughlaq, but another chap who ruled for a brief time. Then Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq or Tughlaq I comes in, kills off the other chap, avenges the Khalji Sultan, and becomes the first Tughlaq to rule from here. And he builds his fort here. So this is his doing, and it was built in a very, very short time, about 2 years' time. So all this you see around is 2 years' work, which is actually not that unusual. Many cities were built very, very quickly. 1.5 years, 2 years or so.
Can't build a house.
Yeah, now you can't. Tughlaq is actually busy trying to quell rebellions here and there. The Mongols are a big problem all the time. In fact, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq became famous as an administrator and a warrior under the Khaljis for his reputation of being extremely good against the Mongols. He was posted at what is today the Multan area in the Pakistan region today, and that's where the Mongols are trying to come in all the time. And Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was extremely good at killing them off. Maybe there were stories about how he killed off all Mongols, cut their heads and used their heads to construct the walls of his fort. All kinds of stories like this. Basically trying to show how effective he was in tackling the Mongol menace. And one reason for all the kind of defensive structures you see around here, the solid defenses, is that the Mongol threat never actually goes away in this period. So for anybody who is in North India, they are a constant presence. They can attack anywhere. They might not come and rule, but they'll just raid and be a pain in the neck all the time, and you don't want that. So that's why all the defense. Now, there's another story about how Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq died early, and I'll come to that a little later. But his successor Muhammad Tughlaq was accused of killing him off, and they say that Muhammad started ruling from here, but soon abandoned it. One reason for that was that all kings do that. All kings want new capitals for themselves. They all want nice, swanky palaces. So it's a tradition that everybody who comes in likes to build a new capital for himself. Second reason, which is only hinted at, never really said in black and white, is that because he was guilty of killing his father, he was never really comfortable living in his father's palace. So once he took over, he was around for a bit, but he soon abandoned this place and built a new capital for himself.
Who was that?
He first moved on to Siri, which was the older capital of the Khaljis. Then he built a small citadel for himself, which is called Adilabad. You'll be able to see it once the sky is a little clearer. And then later, when he decided to completely abandon this area, he went to what is called Jahanpana. What he did was he built a huge wall around the already existing cities in Delhi, which is what is today the Saket, Malviya Nagar, Sarvapriya Vihar area. So there were already cities of Siri there, there were some bits of Prithviraj Chauhan's fort there and all of that. So he put an enclosing wall around it, built some new structures for himself. What is the Begumpur Masjid, the Vijay Mandal, this is all in the Malviya Nagar area, and then called it Jahanpana. So that was his capital. So this is why, and it's actually strange that you build such a huge structure and nobody lives in it for very long.
After that, he went to Daulatabad.
Yeah. Tughlaqs always feature in it. Then Firoz Shah Tughlaq, the third guy, he has a diary, a memoir actually, which is also one of the sources for this period. So many like these, and then of course things like coins, inscriptions you might find here, and tries to see contemporary Delhi as Ibn Battuta might have seen it in the 14th century.
What's the name?
I'm not ready. Google, yes, Google Bhagwan will help us. Okay, now behind you, don't please nobody push and nobody fall. This is a Bauli, and we can go in. So if you want to walk around, there's steps over there. We can actually go down. Yeah. Would you like to do that?
What's a Bauli?
What's a Bauli?
So the idea, this was a water tank basically. So the source is underground water. You dig deep enough when you hit water, and then you build a structure around it. Typical Baulis we know of in the Delhi and places like Agrasen ki Bauli, where they're more narrow.
They are different.
and long.
It's a water storage body, but bound.
Stone you see. I tried to point out the difference between the rough masonry and the dressing over it. If you all come here, you can see it much better on this wall.
How many are getting a cell phone signal?
So when you look at this work, you see the difference, the dress stone and the core. That's what you see here. And yes, complex. So most of these walls are actually collapsed. Most of what you see in terms of the fortification wall from the road, all of these is nothing but a pile of rubble. So these have been carefully reconstructed, the bastions and the walls. And that's why you get a look like this. And you see patches of light red, light pink here. That's the portion which has been most recently restored. So when you go about restoring, you try and put new mortar and strengthen the walls. And the mortar you use is a combination of lime, which is white in color, and brick aggregate, which is red. So when you combine the two, you get this pinkish color. So you see a freshly worked upon monument and it looks nice pink, which is not the way you imagine ruins to look like, but apparently that's the way conservation is done. And you'll find many things around here if you manage to dig. A Bauli which proved to be Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq I's undoing. Now, when he was ruling from Delhi, there was a Sufi saint, we all know of him, Nizamuddin, who was also a contemporary. Now, and Nizamuddin and Ghiyasuddin didn't get along very well. And the reason why, one of the reasons why they say this area is abandoned is because Nizamuddin cursed it. So there's a long-standing tiff between Tughlaq I and Nizamuddin. Apparently, Tughlaq I, when he was constructing this fort, he obviously needed many people to come and work here. All the labor force he could manage. And this was the same time when Nizamuddin was at Nizamuddin and building his own Bauli. So Tughlaq I said that nothing doing, all the labor should come here. You are not going to get any. So Nizamuddin sent away everybody, but because he was such a holy man and a pious man and commanded so much following, the workers decided that we'll work in the day here and we'll go back in the night to work at his Bauli there. So when the king came to know of it, he was obviously furious that how can you do this? So he said, I will stop the supply of oil so that you can't burn lamps in the night to work with. So he did that. Nizamuddin said, okay, never mind, I'm the holy man here. I'll make the lamps burn with the water of the Bauli. So he did that. That's a magical Bauli. The water has the spiritual qualities which
It's Iran's well, basically, not India.
Anybody from ONGC?
So that's one of the reasons of the sanctity of the Baoli. And later, when Ghiyasuddin, Tughlaq I, went off on one of his expeditions, and it is said that Muhammad Tughlaq, his son, who went on to become his successor, Tughlaq II, at this point of time, in the absence of Tughlaq I, Tughlaq II went off to Nizamuddin, said hi, and Nizamuddin apparently blessed him, saying that very soon you will be the king. So obviously Tughlaq I is furious that in my absence you are, blessing people randomly and telling them you're going to be king soon. So apparently sent a threatening message to Nizamuddin that I'll come back and teach you a lesson. And Nizamuddin then prophesied that Delhi is yet far. दिल्ली दूर है. So he said, अभी आप जहाँ हैं वहाँ रहिए, अभी दिल्ली काफी दूर है. And when Ghiyasuddin was coming back, before he had reached Delhi, he had come victorious from his conquest. His son decided to have a nice function for him to celebrate his victory, to welcome him just outside Delhi. So he, in a couple of days' time, he constructed a pavilion, etc., to welcome him. And that pavilion fell on Ghiyasuddin, Tughlaq I, because there were elephants all around, and the pavilion wasn't stable enough. It fell on him and he died. So he didn't reach Delhi actually. So that's why Delhi is yet far is one of the curses which Nizamuddin, gave the Tughlaqs. Also, he said that for Tughlaqabad, when all this protracted tiff was going on, one of the things he said was that since you're so arrogant, this town is either going to be abandoned or inhabited by the Gujars. Gujars, why? Because they're a pastoral community. They're not what you would call high civilization. Yeah, they're a pastoral community, and that also seems to have come out true. So all you see here is people, local villagers herding their cattle here, or it stays abandoned. So you should never fight with a Sufi saint. We're going a little further in palace. Now, the entire city wall is about 4 miles in perimeter, and there were 13 gates all around it. And the gate we have entered from was actually not one of the main gates. It was what is called a postern gate, a smaller one, and once upon a time, it might have been only for exclusive royal use. So it's not that you and I can just stroll in from there. No. There were other gates which were used by people who wanted to come in the palace area for different purposes, and they had all kinds. The names we know now are things like Dhoban Dhobani Gate, which means the washerman and washerwoman's gate, the Khirki Gate, Khirki is a window, the Delhi Gate, and the Hathi Gate, the Andheriya Gate or the Dark Gate. So these are the names you have now. I don't think that these are contemporary or the original names. So when Tughlaq built this fort, he probably wouldn't have named them the ones which I'm telling you, simply because that these names are Hindiized version. So they are probably given by people who were living here as villagers in the early 20th century or so. And we get these names from the fact that what is called official documentation about these forts. These are done in the British times, late 19th century, early 20th century. So this is the time when there are villagers here, and they are the ones who are living in and around this area. And when you go up and document a place, especially when you don't know much about it, the first thing you do is you ask the people who live there, what do you know of this place, what is it called, what do you use it for, etc. And most of our information about not only Tughlaqabad but many other monuments in Delhi comes from these surveys, these documentation surveys. So most names at least would have come down to us in the late 19th and early 20th century. This is called a Hathi Gate. The most common, the obvious connotation is that this is where elephants would have entered the palace from. But it's not necessary. The other gates were also equally large, and elephants, if they wanted to come in or if they were brought in, could have come in from any place. Yeah. Also, I doubt if this was the only or this was the exclusive gate for elephants, simply because just outside the gate it was all water. I'll come to that a little later, why it was so. So we don't really expect a procession to be wading through water to enter the palace, yeah. So they would have used other entrances before, and not only this one. But what is typical in this gate, it gives us a better idea of how other entrances are. Most of the other gates have collapsed. So you just see a pillar here and some bit of rubble there. They're not really standing structures anymore, except the Andheria gate. So they all have what is called a dog-legged corridor. So you enter straight and the corridor sharply turns in either direction. In this case, you can see that it's turning towards the left. And then it will be flanked by rooms, guard houses, and joined into a street which is parallel to the fortification. So the street we've been walking along was all along the fortification wall. So we've been walking in a east-west direction along the fort wall. Now we are going to an area further inside the western side. Now it's full of shrubs, so be careful. Also, it has some really large holes in the ground which go very deep. So make sure you know where you are stepping in. You don't want to be going in. It's very hard to get rescued. So follow me, and if I fall down, please save me. You're all standing on them, and they're all around you. And these are actually a series of granaries. So these are huge, massive storage spaces which were built all along the fortification wall at many places here. So there's a set here, there are about 10 or 12 granaries. Now you can see only the openings, and many of them are actually quite deceptive, so it's easy to fall back, and this is what I was warning you against. And once you're in, it's very difficult to get you out.
Isn't it a good idea to actually clean them up from shrubs and all?
Yeah, do it.
And put a sign.
Implement the idea. Join us
So
later
are these
on.
granaries connected to each other or?
No.
Okay.
If you
They
see
never
any
walk.
connections today, it's because the wall which separated them has collapsed. So the idea was that there would have been some sort of an opening on the top of the granary from where you could put in the grain, and some sort of an outlet also towards the bottom, very much like our silos. So you also see these huge, drums, especially in old houses in villages where the grain is stored still. Yeah? Drums made of aluminium and etc., where they have a small opening at the bottom, and you keep piling up stuff from the top. It's the same concept. And the contemporary records, especially people like Barni and Ibn Battuta, talk a lot about granaries. Ibn Battuta is actually quite good as a source, because being a traveler, he mentioned made a note of almost everything he saw. So whether people had beard, whether they were bald, fat or thin, even details like this which people who already live there don't really care for so much. So you get a lot of detail about the city, how it was. So he says he came in at a time when Muhammad Tughlaq II, is at Jahanpana. He's no longer at Tughlaqabad. And he has some very glorious things to say about Jahanpana, that the walls were so massive, the palaces were beautiful, the bricks shone like gold, and all of this. Very vivid descriptions of what was happening in the city, and he gives a picture of a very thriving city. And he mentions that there are granaries all around. So a lot of scope is there for storage. One, because North India at that point of time had seen a series of famines also. So it was very essential that you have some sort of a backup. In fact, Muhammad Tughlaq II, had a very severe famine during his reign, and it caused a lot of unrest for him. It caused a lot of trouble for him. So these massive storage spaces were opened, particularly during the time of famines, or to withstand a siege. You can see this architecture is all geared up that in case we are surrounded, in case somebody attacks us, we should be able to live it out for a few months. So there should be enough food, there should be enough water. The Baoli we have seen is only one structure. There are actually many more wells, reservoirs, huge, small, all shapes and sizes in this area. Many of them are just completely covered up with bushes, etc. So you really can't make out where they are. But there were plenty former old Delhis. So when I am at Tughlaqabad, those areas are the older cities for me. And when this also shifts out, people are no longer living here. They are at ITO, Kotla. Yeah? So this is how, even though the capitals shift, some people do stay behind. But not in this case. Like I said, this was completely abandoned. For a very long time, nobody was there. For many centuries. It's only much later, in the late 18th century, that you find a small village-like settlement in the Citadel area. I'll point it out to you when we go there. But that was a very small, not a substantial settlement. So you don't. The fort was actually abandoned completely within a matter of 7 years or so.
So is all this land government property now?
Yes.
encroached upon by
Yes,
like
yes.
100 people?
There's also a bit of confusion about who owns what. The archaeological survey owns the buildings, the ruins, but typically what happens, the horticulture department owns the shrubs and the ground.
Bad state.
Yeah. So the ASI will conserve the wall, but it might not cut the grass. So there are some ambiguities like this, and it has led to some ridiculous lack of work. But
What's the difference between a fort and a citadel? Is the same thing?
a fort would be a larger area. A citadel is the most exclusive and the most well-defended part of the fort. So it's usually at a much higher ground from the rest of the town or the rest of the fort, and it would be even more well-guarded. It would be exclusively royal. Yeah.
Was
Exclusively royal.
Qutbuddin Aibak the first one to make Delhi as a capital, or slaves were the first one to make
No,
Delhi as a capital?
before Aibak there was Prithviraj Chauhan, the Tomars were here. So Delhi has been the capital for a fairly long time before them also. And the bit we are walking into, this is the north-south direction. The south is behind us and this is the north. So we had initially entered the gate and walked towards the west. So now we've come back a little bit and walking in a direction perpendicular to the previous one. Now this bit is again pile of rocks here, pile of rocks there. But apparently this area would have been the series of audience halls which a king needs to have to hold his darbar. So the area we're walking through is actually private audience halls going into the more public audience halls. Yeah. So this is how it moves. Now the halls just look like rooms. Some of them don't even look like rooms. These would have been originally separated by a series of gates because you can't just walk in. Yeah? This is a royal area. Offices are here. This is where the court is being organized. The darbar is held daily. So it's not just like that you stroll in whenever you feel like. There would have been privacy levels. There would be series of checks and guards at each and every point. Now none of those portals, none of those gateways actually survive. So we just try and guess that okay, this might have been the extent of one private audience hall. The second one would have been starting from here and so on. So this is the direction we are moving in. We are actually moving in the opposite, from the wrong direction. You don't move in from the private space to the public space. You move in from the public space to the private one. And the reason for this is the way the route we are following is not a public route. I mentioned earlier that the gate we entered through was not a public gate. It was probably an exclusively royal gate connected to the citadel, which would have been the royal area. So if you come in this way, you're probably following the way which should have been used exclusively by the royalty. Probably the king came in. And the rest of the population, whoever had any business with the court, etc., would have come in from the other side. We will gradually go to the side. And once we are at a higher elevation, you'll get the plan, the layout a little better. Right now I'm just talking about it, but you'll be able to see it better once we are at a higher ground.
Where is the citadel?
Citadel is all that bit you see there. Now, when I say a mound, it means in archaeological terms, it's just a bit of land which rises above the ground level because that's where the settlements were. So over a period of time, old settlements get replaced by newer ones, and gradually over centuries, because there have been successive settlements or even if one or two settlements, the thing is that it gets covered by earth, it gets covered by trees, earth, etc. So it becomes a mound. So archaeologists dig at mounds. Yeah, they cut portions of mounds and dig it. So this bit which you see was actually some sort of a building. When I say this was a palace area, all of this was building. But today, because it has all collapsed, it's all debris covered by vegetation, etc., it's a mound only, mostly inaccessible. So we're going through this area, and which was, like I said, probably parts of the audience halls, and further towards north. Okay, now the opening, the Maidan-like thing you see here where we are standing, this is next to the audience hall, Darbar hall. So we have walked through an area which was the court portion, and the court portion actually goes further north. You see a little bit of the top of the building there, behind the vegetation. So all of that was part of the halls, the audience halls. And it ends closer to the boundary wall you see. So there's a street between the palace complex and the boundary wall, and then the Maidan next to it. Now this area would have been a more public area. The point we entered from was a more private one. This is the more public area, and towards my right, just beyond you can see a slightly mound-like structure. Just beyond that was the east gate of the town, the palace area, which would have linked it to the town. The town beyond it. So the boundary wall you see is the boundary wall not of the entire fort, it's the boundary wall of the palace area. Beyond it was the town, which is where the lower people lived, the workers and the rest of the town lived. So this would have been a more elite and official area, and beyond this wall would have been the outer wall of the fort. So it's a much bigger area than we imagine. And all this while you were walking along the fortification wall, this was the boundary wall which we could see. So we can't even see the wall which was after this. Yeah? And if you walk out through the east gate which connected it to the town, all that bit is now overtaken by the new settlement. So all the new area settlement of the Suttatlakabad area is that. And it's also next to the citadel. Guys, you have to hear me out. You won't get food otherwise. see, everyone is coming now.
You're not giving food.
Okay. The arcade we are standing on is probably stables, and the ground you just walked through would have been slightly lower, so there would have been much more space. But I think it's just a good view, that's why I got you up here, even though it's not a pleasant climb all the time. Now the view you get here will help you understand where all we've been walking through. So we entered from somewhere behind this bastion. Yeah. Oh, that's a Neel guy, yeah.
Plenty. देख लो भाई.
It's part of the deer family.
नहीं देख लो कुछ पहले देख लो तो बताना.
It's basically the juice you are getting for free for kids.
And we have walked through this area. So this is the palace area which goes north-south. That's the north, that's the south. This is the palace area and you can actually make out the mound now. Yeah? And there's Neel guy. You'll find at most places in the Aravallis, especially towards the south. Campuses like JNU still have them. Not so much now, but they're still there. Neel guy.
Blue cow. Not blue and they're not cows. And they're deers.
And I feel like this is a smaller specimen. They go grey. The fully grown of their species go slightly grey and they're much larger. And they're very strong, very strong. So to bang your car into one, it's probably a car that will suffer, not the Neel guy.
Don't try it.
No, don't try it. And this depression you see, this is a quarry for all the construction you see around. So it's not of a geometric pattern pre-decided, but of a rocky hill. So when Tughlaq went and ahead and decided that I want to construct a fort here, he saw the site. It was already a rocky outcrop here, and that is why where we started digging. So he started digging, quarrying, mining for stone. He used the stone for construction of these massive palaces and fortress. And the depression which was created as the result of the quarrying was filled with water to create reservoirs. So this is one such reservoir. Yeah. All of this would have been full of water. So this is a locally mined stone. We are actually in the Aravali region. So most construction here has been, on stones taken on site. You don't really have to get material from anywhere. These are portions of battlements which have fallen down. So you can see them on top of the bastion. So those are the very stones. They don't look as big over there, but they're fairly big pieces of stone. Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
these were quarried.
Yeah, they're quarried and shaped like this.
Cut into.
ramparts of the citadel, and the area you see all around is full of water. So now what happened, I mentioned earlier that Ghiyasuddin built the fort on a rocky hill, slightly elevated bit of land, and the perimeter of the fort, all the fortifications follow the contours of the hill. So wherever the hill went, the wall followed. That's how we get the outline of the fort. Now, before it was constructed, this was a natural elevation. On the basin here, this is where during monsoons, the water would collect. So it was something like a natural reservoir, not exactly a very large one, but a small one. This is where the water would collect. Pretty much like water collects on our roads now. Yeah. So what did Ghiyasuddin do? He built his fort here. He made some dams around this area, made sure that the water would stay, so that all this expanse you see around you would have become an artificial lake. Then he built his fort there and built his tomb there, connected the tomb and the fort to the passage through that water. And that's the passage you see there. You see a couple of people walking on it. And the road you see today simple. The road was created obviously much later. It's a modern creation, and it was created by breaching of that passage. So when you walk out, you will see that it is broken, and the road made through it. So initially none of this was there. All of this would have been water. This was chosen very early for conservation by the British. The late 19th century, in fact in the 1862s, 63, there's a chap called Cunningham, a very well-known chap. He's the head of the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India. And his reports, he travelled all over the country and wrote many reports of these ruins everywhere. Yeah, Buddhist monuments, Jain monuments, Hindu temples, medieval forts, everywhere. And that's the beginning of the time when policy on conservation is being formulated. The British are just trying to figure out what to do with these ruins. They realize that they're going to be rulers soon. Yeah? And in fact they are officially the rulers by the time it's 1862, 70s. So they have to make a policy on what to do with these ruins. Whether to maintain them, where to spend money, whether to abandon them or to dismantle it altogether and put it somewhere else, use the construction material somewhere. All of that has happened. So one of the reasons of how things were chosen was that what was considered as representative of a particular style. Yeah? So for instance, for the Tughlaq period, they decided this tomb is a great representative example of this particular kind of architecture. So that gives you one reason for diverting all your attention for conservation on that particular structure. A little bit of conservation work was done on the fortification walls also, and that is why they're still here, I think. But most of the inside area was not really conserved so well. It's also a matter of money, because at that point of time, archaeology is really not a great, place where you'd want to spend your money. You're already trying to do a lot of other things. It's only much later, and archaeology has never been cash rich, never. So there's always been a paucity of funds. So two reasons I can think of why certain things are chosen for conservation and certain things are not. And this is an escape route built inside the wall. This is the outer fortification wall. There would have been arcade like this, and what they've done is they have created an opening in the ground. It goes down through steps and then it turns sharply towards the wall, towards the right. And there's a further inclination. It goes narrow, 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 so that on the other end there is an opening just outside on the wall. So you actually escape out into the water. So you'll be able to see the opening once we are towards the tomb. So you'll be able to see an opening on the wall. So that's the escape route. And these people have actually
They have escaped. I mean, possibly they've gone out from it. But they can't go.
Go from this way, take the car.
Oh wow, that's you.
Easy, easy.
Oh, that's it, huh?
There's a bike waiting for us. That's it.
Fantastic. Okay. Oh, wow. Cool. So we can
one obvious thing we can think of is that this is where you put people to torture people. Firozabad, what is the Kotla citadel near Aitio also has something like this. So it's not an unusual feature.
Store the treasure.
Exactly. So things like storage and storage of anything, maybe money, maybe ammunition, anything. So it's mostly for storage, we think. And there are references to these passages and these dark rooms throughout the contemporary period. So people like Ibn Battuta, people like Barani, they mention these passages and say that it's so dark that you cannot go in without a lamp and a guide. And they actually mentioned, just to illustrate how difficult it is to negotiate these spaces, they say that once a guy went in alone and they had to send in guards after 3 days because he still hadn't come out, just to get him out. So just an example of how difficult these places could be to negotiate. Now some more climbing. We are actually going up there, which is the highest point in this entire walk, but it's worth the climb. Building which is called Jahanama. In the contemporary records, this is what it is referred to as. It means a building which has a view to the world. And you can see why it is called that. It has a view to the entire neighborhood. You can see the modern settlement which would have been part of the Fikrabad town. So the boundary, a little bit of whatever the boundary is left, which you see beyond the town, was the boundary of the entire fort.
Can you like point
No,
out
not
some
necessarily
places?
round. It's more like a irregular hexagon. This is all. Yeah. This is the palace area. The city is beyond that, including the modern city. Yeah. You'll get a better idea. It goes all the way around. Okay, let's come over to the other side.
She's having something to say or? She's having something.
Private palaces. There might have been offices still here, but he preferred to live there. And then later he entirely shifted to what was called Jahanpana, towards South Delhi area. older than Ghiyasuddin's own. So this tomb came up first, and probably as an afterthought, Ghiyasuddin decided that this is a nice location, let's have my own tomb there. So some people say Zafar Khan might have been his son, one of his sons who died early in one of the battles, numerous battles they might have had at some point in time. Others say that he was just a very important nobleman who died very young, and Ghiyasuddin built, that is Tughlaq the first, built the tomb for him. But the structure is definitely older than the main tomb here. And so much so that the main tomb is often referred to as an afterthought to this one.